If you could translate what my wife just said, I'll dash you my wife.
Are you serious right now?
The true worth of a man is not measured by his money, but by his respect
Vincent
for others.
Morello, a man whose wealth could buy anything but wisdom, raised his glass and mocked his black security guard in front of his guests. His elegant wife, Isabella, had just spoken beautifully in Spanish to their visitors. El verdadero valor de un hombre no se mide por su dinero, sino por su respeto hacia los demás. The true worth of a man is not measured by his money, but by his respect for others. But Vincent, too proud to admit he didn't understand, laughed loudly and shouted, "Hey, James! If you can translate what my wife just said, I'll dash you my wife." The guests roared with laughter. Isabella's face went pale. Then James, calm and unshaken, looked him straight in the eye and replied fluently, "The ladies."
If you could translate what my wife just said, I'll dash you my wife.
Are you serious right now?
The true worth of a man is not measured by his money, but by his respect for others.
The crowd froze, and for the first time, the billionaire had no words. But what happened next shocked everyone. A few minutes later, Isabella began packing her clothes, walking straight toward the black security man's room. And what happened after that would humble the billionaire in a way he would never forget. Every morning, the golden gates of the Morello mansion swung open like a scene from a royal film. The polished black limousine glided in, reflecting the rising sun as if the car itself carried glory. Inside sat Mr. Vincent Morello, one of the richest men in the city, a man known not only for his success but for his pride that towered higher than his mansion. He believed the world was divided into two kinds of people, those who give orders and those who obey them, and he made sure everyone knew which side he belonged to. As the car slowed to a stop near the entrance, James Carter, the tall black security guard, stood at attention. His posture was perfect, his expression calm. "Good morning, sir," he said in a steady tone, opening the gate with quiet discipline. Vincent barely looked at him. "Morning," he muttered, waving a dismissive hand as if James were part of the gate itself, functional, unimportant, and silent. To most people, James was invisible. He was the man who opened doors, stood in the rain, and saluted cars. But behind those calm brown eyes was a quiet storm, a man who had seen more of life than any billionaire cocktail guest could imagine. Vincent's mansion sparkled with white marble, floors and chandeliers dripping like frozen stars. Every detail screamed wealth, but under that shine was arrogance so thick that even the servants walked on eggshells. He mocked his chef for being too slow, laughed at his gardeners for sweating too much, and treated his staff like background furniture. James never reacted. He simply did his job, silent, disciplined, observant. When others whispered complaints, James listened but never joined. He believed every man reveals himself not through his words, but through how he treats others. That morning, Vincent stepped out of the limousine wearing a silver suit and his trademark smirk. His wife, Isabella, followed, elegant, poised, her Spanish accent soft and melodic. Unlike Vincent, she always greeted James kindly. "Buenos dias, Señor Carter," she said warmly. James nodded respectfully. "Buenos dias, ma'am," Vincent frowned. "You and that Spanish of yours," he said, chuckling as they walked away. "You'll start teaching the staff next." He didn't notice how Isabella's smile faded slightly, nor did he see the way James's calm eyes followed them, not out of envy, but quiet concern. He'd learned long ago that some people wear wealth to cover what's missing inside, and that day, as the golden gates closed behind the billionaire, James had a strange feeling deep in his chest, that pride was about to meet its lesson. James Carter's world was simple but full of quiet meaning. When the mansion gates closed each evening, he didn't head to a fancy apartment or a bar like some of his co-workers. He took the long walk down to a modest neighborhood where laughter echoed from children playing with worn-out soccer balls and mothers cooked dinner with the windows open. There, inside a small two-bedroom house, lived James and his 10-year-old niece, Amira. She was the only family he had left. Her mother, James's sister, had died in a car crash years ago, leaving Amira with no one but the uncle who promised to protect her no matter what. That night, as James removed his security uniform, Amira ran to him, holding a Spanish book in her hands. "Uncle James, can we read again tonight?" she asked eagerly. He smiled, his face softening from the day's fatigue. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's see what we've got." As they sat together at the small table, James began reading aloud in fluent Spanish, correcting Amira's pronunciation gently. The world outside might have seen him as just a gatekeeper, but here, in this humble home, he was a teacher, a protector, and a father figure. "Uncle," Amira asked, "how come you know so many languages?" He chuckled quietly. "Life teaches you more than school ever will. I worked with people from all over the world when I was in the UN. It helped me see that respect is the only language everyone understands." Amira tilted her head. "Do rich people understand that too?" James paused. A shadow passed across his face. "Some do," he said slowly. "But others are too busy listening to their own voices." Meanwhile, at the mansion, Vincent sat in his study surrounded by cigars, wine bottles, and unfinished contracts. His wife Isabella approached quietly. "Vincent, you were harsh again today," she said softly. "James is not your servant. He's your employee, a human being." Vincent waved her off. "He's paid to stand and smile." "Don't worry yourself with him." Isabella's eyes dimmed. "You never see people, Vincent." "You only see positions," Vincent laughed, sipping his drink. "That's why I'm at the top and they're not." But somewhere deep inside, her words stung, though his pride was too thick to admit it. That night, as James tucked Amira into bed, he looked out the window toward the distant mansion lights. He whispered to himself, "Some men have everything, except peace." And far away, Vincent Morello poured himself another drink, unaware that the humble man he ignored daily would soon become the mirror that shattered his pride. Saturday afternoon arrived with sunshine spilling across the Morello estate like liquid gold. The mansion buzzed with life, music drifting through palm trees, waiters gliding between tables, and guests laughing with champagne glasses in hand. Vincent Morello stood at the center of it all, dressed in white linen, his gold wristwatch catching the light. To him, this wasn't a party. It was a declaration of status. He had invited investors, politicians, and celebrities, all to witness how far he'd risen. But deep down, he wasn't celebrating success. He was celebrating himself. James Carter stood a few meters away, posted near the pool entrance. His black uniform contrasted sharply against the marble tiles. He moved like a shadow, quiet, watchful, unseen. Occasionally, guests glanced at him but looked away quickly. To them, he was part of the background, like a statue meant to guard the rich. Then came Isabella, Vincent's wife. She stepped onto the patio in a flowing emerald dress that caught the breeze. Her hair shimmered under the sun, and her smile carried the calm confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. When she spoke, it was in soft, graceful Spanish, her native tongue. The group of foreign guests, mostly from Madrid, listened with admiration. Her voice carried warmth, humor, and intellect. "Vincent's wife is so elegant," one woman whispered. "Sí, tiene clase," another replied with a knowing smile. "She has class," Vincent noticed. His grin tightened. He didn't understand much of what they were saying, but the sound of Spanish, fluid and musical, made him feel small in front of his own guests. He faked a laugh and interrupted them. "Ha! I don't know what you're saying, Isabella, but I hope it's good." Everyone chuckled politely, but Isabella could sense his discomfort. She gently placed her hand on his arm. "It's just a story about our trip to Madrid, love," she said softly. He nodded stiffly, but the wine in his hand was already clouding his judgment. He wanted attention again. He needed the room to revolve around him. Moments later, he spotted James standing still near the hedge, hands behind his back, eyes scanning the crowd. The sight of that calm, composed figure triggered something ugly inside him, an urge to prove power, to remind everyone who ruled this house. Vincent raised his glass and called out loudly, his voice slicing through the laughter. "Hey, James! You've been standing there all day doing nothing. Tell you what, if you can translate what my wife just said in Spanish, I'll dash you my wife." The crowd burst into laughter. Glasses clinked. Some guests cheered, but the laughter was hollow. Isabella froze, her face pale as marble. She couldn't believe what she'd heard. James, still at attention, looked straight at Vincent. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. His calm was unnerving. "Sir," he said finally in a steady voice, "are you sure about that bet?" Vincent smirked, soaking in the moment. "Oh, yes. You can't even speak English properly. Let's see you do Spanish." The crowd laughed again, some out of amusement, others out of discomfort. Isabella's eyes burned with quiet fury, and James's silence felt heavier than any words. He bowed slightly. "Very well, sir. I accept." The air around them changed. The laughter faded. And in that moment, the party became a stage where arrogance was about to meet its reckoning. For a moment, the entire poolside froze. Only the faint trickle of water from the fountain filled the silence. All eyes turned toward the tall black man in uniform, James Carter, standing under the harsh glare of the afternoon sun. Vincent Morello leaned back in his chair, grinning, swirling the red wine in his glass like a king toying with his court. "Well, go ahead, James," he said loudly. "Translate what my wife just said." He turned to his guests with a smirk. "Let's see what kind of education our security man claims to have." Some guests chuckled nervously. Others avoided eye contact, sensing the humiliation dripping through his tone. Isabella's heart pounded. Her face flushed with shame, not for herself, but for the man she'd once admired. She whispered sharply, "Vincent, enough. You're drunk." He waved her off. "Oh, come on, Bella." It's a harmless joke, but it wasn't harmless. Not to her. Not to James. And not to the people watching. Some laughing, others uncomfortable, all silently judging the billionaire's arrogance. James stood still, his expression unreadable. His dark eyes were calm but intense, like deep waters hiding a quiet strength. Then he spoke softly, "Madam, would you please repeat your words?" The air trembled with anticipation. Isabella hesitated for a moment, then lifted her chin and said in her elegant Spanish tone, "El verdadero valor de un hombre no se mide por su dinero, sino por su respeto hacia los demás." A few guests nodded, understanding the phrase. Vincent blinked, pretending to be amused, though he had no clue what she'd said. "Now, James," he said mockingly, "tell us what that means." James met his gaze, firm, unwavering, and replied, his voice deep and fluent. "The lady says, the true worth of a man is not measured by his money, but by his respect for others." The laughter stopped. The clinking glasses paused mid-air. Silence blanketed the patio. Vincent's grin vanished. His eyes widened, searching James's face for a trace of mockery, but found only calm dignity. You speak Spanish?" he stammered. James nodded politely. "Yes, sir. And French, Arabic, Swahili, and English. I served with the United Nations security team before joining your company." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some guests whispered in awe. Others exchanged knowing glances. Isabella's lips curved into a faint, proud smile, not at Vincent, but at the man who had just restored dignity to the moment. Vincent's cheeks flushed crimson. He tried to laugh it off. "Oh, well, you see, I was just joking, my friend. Just having a bit of fun." But James's reply was measured, respectful, yet sharper than any insult. "Of course, sir." "I understand. Some jokes say more about the person who makes them than the one they're aimed at." The words landed like a quiet explosion. No one laughed. Not even Vincent's closest friends. The pool water shimmered between them, a mirror reflecting one man's humility and another's downfall. And as Isabella rose from her seat and walked away without a word, Vincent felt something he hadn't felt in years, the weight of his own shame. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden streaks across the marble tiles as the atmosphere shifted from laughter to awkward silence. The echo of James's calm words still hung in the air like smoke. Vincent stood frozen, gripping his wine glass so tightly his knuckles turned white. For the first time in years, the billionaire who ruled over boardrooms and headlines felt utterly powerless. His guests, once loyal flatterers, were now whispering behind their hands. His pride had been pierced in front of the very people whose admiration he craved most. Isabella turned to him slowly. Her face, usually gentle and composed, carried a look he'd never seen before, quiet disgust. "Vincent," she said, her voice trembling with restrained fury, "you humiliated yourself today. Not him, you." He tried to laugh, his tone brittle. "Oh, come on, darling. It was all in fun. No need to make a scene." But Isabella didn't smile. "A scene?" she said bitterly. "You turned your wife into a bet, in front of strangers." The words sliced deep. A few guests lowered their gazes, uncomfortable. James, still standing near the edge of the pool, bowed his head slightly. "Ma'am, please," he said respectfully. "No offense taken. I understand it was just a misunderstanding." Vincent seized the lifeline like a drowning man. "See? He understands. No harm done." But James continued, his tone calm yet piercing. "Still, sir, misunderstandings have a way of revealing truths we don't like to face." That quiet sentence hit Vincent harder than any public insult ever could. He opened his mouth to respond, but found no words. He'd been outmatched not by another billionaire, but by the very man whose name he barely remembered most mornings. At the far end of the pool, one of the guests, a tall black businessman named Mr. Harlan Price, stood up slowly, smirking. "Well, Vincent," he said, voice thick with irony, "if we're keeping our word, a bet's a bet. You said you'd give him your wife if he translated correctly." The guests erupted into startled murmurs. Isabella's face went pale. Vincent's head snapped toward Harlan. "That's ridiculous! It was a joke!" Harlan shrugged. "Maybe to you, but you made it public, my friend, and I have it recorded right here." He held up his phone. Word for word, Vincent's heart slammed against his ribs. The humiliation that had begun as laughter was now eating him alive. "Delete that recording," he snapped. "Now," Harlan smirked. "Maybe later. But first I'd like to see how a man of honor handles his own words." Isabella's voice was cold now, almost whispering. "You shouldn't have made me the price of your pride, Vincent." With that, she turned and began walking toward the house. The heels of her shoes clicked sharply on the stone floor, each step a drumbeat of defiance. "Isabella, where are you going?" Vincent shouted after her. She didn't turn back. "To find a man who still understands respect." Every guest watched in stunned silence. The mighty Vincent Morello stood speechless as his wife disappeared through the mansion doors. And James Carter, the invisible guard, stood tall in quiet dignity, his expression unreadable but his message unmistakable. The night air had grown thick with tension. The pool lights shimmered on the surface, but the laughter that once filled the Morello mansion had vanished. Guests whispered in small clusters, unsure whether to leave or watch what would happen next. The great Vincent Morello, the man who once commanded every room, stood exposed, his pride bleeding through his silence. Inside the mansion, Isabella was in their bedroom, throwing clothes into a small suitcase. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from heartbreak. Each shirt folded was a memory, each tear that fell, a quiet farewell. Downstairs, Vincent slammed his wine glass onto the marble counter, his voice echoing in frustration. Unbelievable. All this over a joke? She's being ridiculous. No one answered. Even the servants avoided his eyes. The only sound was the distant hum of crickets and the slow footsteps of James Carter, who remained faithfully by his post outside the gate. One of the guests, Harlan Price, approached him with a half-smile. "You handled that well, my friend." "Not many men could keep their dignity after what he said." James nodded politely. "Dignity isn't given, sir. It's kept." Harlan chuckled softly. "Wise words. You've embarrassed him without raising your voice. That's power." James didn't respond. He didn't enjoy humiliating anyone, not even Vincent. But he also knew that silence sometimes speaks louder than anger. Moments later, Isabella stepped out, dragging her suitcase. The click of her heels on the marble sent shockwaves through the crowd. Vincent appeared behind her, his face pale and desperate. "Isabella, stop! You're not leaving over this nonsense!" She turned, eyes glistening with pain. "You called me a prize, Vincent." "A thing to wager. Do you realize what that means?" He reached out, but she stepped back. "It was a joke." "No," she interrupted. "It was your truth disguised as humor." Gasps spread among the guests. Harlan folded his arms, watching closely. Vincent glanced toward James, anger flashing in his eyes. "This is your fault! You could have kept quiet!" James stood tall, his tone calm. "Respectfully, sir, you asked me to speak." For a moment, Vincent said nothing. He looked around and saw the eyes of every guest, judging, disappointed, pitying. His empire of arrogance was crumbling in one night. Isabella sighed deeply and faced James. "Mr. Carter, may I stay in your quarters tonight?" The request hung in the air like thunder. Everyone froze. James was stunned. "Ma'am, that wouldn't be right." "It's not about right," she said firmly. "It's about principle." Vincent's eyes widened. "Don't you dare, Isabella." She turned to him, voice calm but cutting. "You bet me away." "I'm simply honoring your bet," the crowd gasped. Vincent's jaw tightened. "If you walk into that room, I swear—" "You'll do what, Vincent? Humiliate yourself again?" Harlan interrupted, stepping forward. "You made the bet. Everyone heard it?" The billionaire's hand shook as he pointed at James. "If she goes with you, I'll call the police. I'll have you arrested." But Harlan's tone was cool and steady. "If you call them, I'll be the first witness. And I've got everything recorded." Vincent froze. The humiliation was complete. He sank into a chair, covering his face with both hands. The mighty man of power had finally met the weight of his own words. Isabella turned to James one last time. "Please," she said softly. "I just need a place to think." James hesitated, then nodded respectfully. "Yes, ma'am." But only out of decency, not defiance. As they walked toward the staff quarters, Vincent stared at the ground, his reflection trembling in the pool water. For the first time, he realized that pride, once his armor, had become his greatest punishment. The mansion that once glowed with laughter now stood in uneasy silence. The music had stopped, the waiters had vanished, and the remaining guests lingered in awkward murmurs, too stunned to leave. What had begun as a cheerful gathering had turned into a public lesson in humility. Harlan Price, the black businessman who had recorded Vincent's words, stood by the pool, sipping from a half-empty glass. His sharp eyes followed every move. He had known men like Vincent before, men who believed money bought worth, men who smiled only when others bowed. Tonight, Harlan wanted him to remember that the world still had witnesses. In the distance, James Carter walked beside Isabella as she headed toward the staff quarters. He carried her small suitcase with quiet grace, not daring to look directly at her. The gravel crunched beneath their feet, and the mansion lights faded behind them. "I'm sorry you're caught in this," Isabella said softly, her voice trembling. "You don't deserve to be in the middle of my husband's pride." James shook his head. "Ma'am, you did nothing wrong." "Pride's a shadow. Once it grows too tall, it darkens everything around it." She looked at him then, really looked. And for the first time, she saw not a guard, but a man of deep integrity. A man who understood respect not as a word, but as a way of living. Meanwhile, back at the pool, Vincent's hands trembled around his wine glass. His face was pale, his once powerful voice reduced to a whisper. "She's making a fool of me," he muttered. Harlan stepped closer, smirking faintly. "No, Vincent. You did that yourself." Vincent shot him a glare. "You think you're better than me?" Harlan's tone was calm, almost pitying. "No, just wiser. A real man doesn't test another man's dignity to feel tall. He stands tall by giving others respect." Those words burned worse than alcohol. Vincent turned away, his jaw tightening. Inside the staff quarters, Isabella set her small bag on a chair. The room was simple, neat bed, wooden desk, small bookshelf. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I'm not staying long," she said quietly. "I just need him to understand I'm not property." James nodded. You don't have to explain, ma'am. I understand perfectly. He began to step out, but she stopped him gently. James, why didn't you tell anyone about your education, your languages, your past? He smiled faintly. Because people don't hear truth when they're blinded by pride. I wait until life opens their ears. She sat on the edge of the bed, eyes glistening. Then I hope life opens his tonight. Back at the poolside, Vincent's anger turned to desperation. She can't actually stay there, he shouted, startling the few guests who remained. Harlan crossed his arms. She can, and she will, if that's what it takes to teach you what a husband should be. Vincent clenched his fists. I'll call security. You are security, Vincent, Harlan interrupted coldly. At least you were supposed to be hers. Those words hit harder than any insult. For a moment, Vincent saw himself clearly, not as the billionaire he pretended to be, but as a man stripped of respect, standing small before the truth. As the night deepened, the guests quietly left one by one. Harlan gave James a nod of respect before departing, whispering, You've already won, brother. You just don't need to say it. When the gates finally closed, James stood under the stars, silent and still. In that quiet, he felt the weight of two worlds, the arrogance of one man, and the dignity that had just restored balance to both. The night hung heavy over the Morello mansion. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the proud speeches, all had died into an echo of regret. The pool lights reflected against the marble walls, painting Vincent's lonely figure in cold blue. Inside the staff quarters, Isabella sat on the edge of James's small bed. The faint hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Her mind replayed the humiliation she had endured, the look of pride in her husband's eyes when he mocked the man who had done nothing but serve him faithfully. James stood at the door, keeping a respectful distance. He had offered her a chair, but she had insisted on sitting quietly to think. Her beauty, once framed by confidence, was now clouded by disappointment. Do you think I went too far? She finally asked. James hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Ma'am, you stood up for your dignity. That's never too far, she gave a tired smile. He doesn't see it that way. To Vincent, I embarrassed him. James shook his head. No, ma'am. He embarrassed himself. You just stopped pretending it was fine. His tone was gentle but firm, and it touched something deep inside her. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to her not as Vincent Morello's wife, but as a person. Outside, Vincent paced back and forth in his living room, anger and fear colliding inside him. He kept glancing toward the window, hoping she'd come back. Every minute that passed felt like an hour. His reflection in the glass looked older, smaller, emptier. She can't be serious, he muttered to himself. She can't actually stay there. With him. But deep down, he knew this wasn't about jealousy, it was about shame. Isabella was teaching him something he'd never let anyone teach him before, humility. At the same time, in the staff room, Isabella's phone buzzed. It was a message from Vincent. Come back. Let's talk. Don't make this worse. She stared at it for a long moment, then locked the screen without replying. James noticed the quiet pain on her face. He'll calm down, ma'am, he said softly. But sometimes people need to lose peace before they find sense. Isabella looked at him, eyes glassy with unshed tears. You speak like a man who's lost a lot. He nodded. Loss is the best teacher, ma'am. It teaches you what really matters. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. I'm not angry because he made that bet. I'm angry because he meant it, even for a second. I've stood by him through every rise, every business war, every scandal. But respect? He never learned that. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the wind rustled the palm leaves, and somewhere far off, thunder murmured faintly. Finally, Isabella stood up. Thank you, James, for being decent when my own husband wasn't. I'll stay here tonight. Not out of spite, but because he needs to feel what it's like to be alone. James nodded slowly. Understood, ma'am. I'll stay outside the door just in case. Her eyes softened. You don't have to. It's my job, he said with quiet conviction. And so, as the storm clouds gathered over the city, Isabella lay down on the small bed meant for a guard, her mind heavy but resolute. Outside, James stood under the porch light. Tall and unmoving, a silent protector of the woman whose husband had mistaken pride for power. Across the mansion lawn, Vincent watched from his balcony, heart pounding as he saw the faint shadow of his wife through the staff window. For the first time in his life, the billionaire realized something terrifying. Money couldn't buy back respect once it was lost. The rain began just after midnight, soft at first, then steady, tapping gently against the window of the small staff quarters. Isabella lay awake on the narrow bed, her eyes tracing the ceiling as flashes of lightning lit up the room. Her thoughts were loud, full of regret and exhaustion. On the other side of the thin wall, James sat in the security office, eyes fixed on the live monitors that showed every corner of the mansion. Normally, it was a routine night, empty hallways, quiet gates, the hum of power in the silence. But tonight felt different. The house didn't feel like a palace anymore. It felt like a battlefield that pride had destroyed. He sipped from a mug of coffee gone cold. For a moment, he glanced at the small monitor showing the hallway outside the staff room. He could see Isabella sitting up, holding her head in her hands. The image stirred a quiet ache in him, not romantic, but deeply human. She was a woman carrying the weight of a man's arrogance, and he understood that kind of pain all too well. A soft knock came at the door. James turned. It was Isabella standing in the doorway, her hair slightly damp from the humidity, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Can't sleep?" James asked gently. She shook her head. "My thoughts are too loud." He offered her a seat. She sat across from him, glancing at the multiple screens glowing around them. "So this is where you work every night?" she asked quietly. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "I keep watch while everyone else sleeps." She smiled faintly. "And who keeps watch over you?" James didn't answer immediately. His gaze softened. "God, maybe, or no one. Depends on the night." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She leaned forward slightly. "You're not like anyone Vincent works with. You don't fear him. You don't flatter him either." James smiled, just a hint. "Fear blinds judgment and flattery kills truth. I try to stay clear of both." For a moment, silence filled the small room, only the rain and the soft hum of electricity. "James," Isabella said softly, "you could have embarrassed him even more tonight. But you didn't. Why?" He looked down at his hands. "Because I know what it feels like to be broken in front of others. When you've lived long enough, you stop fighting to win. You fight to keep your peace." Her eyes glistened. "You're wiser than the men who run entire companies." He gave a modest shrug. "Wisdom isn't about wealth, ma'am. It's about knowing what not to say when you could." At that moment, thunder rolled outside, shaking the window slightly. Isabella flinched. James stood up and closed the shutters gently, saying, "You should rest. Tomorrow will be heavy." She nodded, then looked at him one last time. "Thank you, James, for showing me that decency still exists." He smiled. "It always does, ma'am. It just doesn't make noise." When she returned to the small bed, James sat back down, eyes on the monitors again. Yet his mind was far away, on how life could place people in strange positions, how a billionaire could lose peace while a guard guarded it. Outside, Vincent stood by his study window, rain dripping from his balcony. He watched the dim light in the security room glow faintly through the darkness. Jealousy, regret, and guilt mixed into a storm inside him, fiercer than the one outside. For the first time, he wasn't sure if his wealth could fix what his pride had broken. Morning broke gray and heavy, the rain finally giving way to soft mist that wrapped around the mansion like a veil of guilt. The driveway still glistened with puddles from the storm, and the chirping of birds sounded distant, almost cautious, like even nature knew silence was safer that day. Vincent Morello hadn't slept a minute. His bloodshot eyes stared blankly at the untouched glass of whiskey beside him. The night had been long, filled with memories of laughter that had turned to shame, of his wife walking away, and of his guard standing taller than him. For the first time, Vincent felt the sharp ache of insignificance. Downstairs, the household staff whispered as they worked. No one dared mention what had happened. The guests were gone, but rumors weren't. Everyone knew what the boss had said. Everyone had seen his wife move into the staff quarters. The mansion that once commanded fear now hummed with quiet judgment. Vincent slammed his glass onto the table. "She's still there?" he asked his butler harshly. The man hesitated. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Morello has not returned to the main house." "Unbelievable," Vincent muttered, pacing. "Sleeping in a guard's room like some spectacle. She's humiliating me." He stopped abruptly, his anger boiling over. "Where's Carter?" "At the front gate, sir." "As always." Vincent grabbed his phone and stormed toward the door. His voice thundered through the hall. "We'll see how long he keeps that job." Outside, James stood by the gate as steady and calm as ever. His eyes scanned the morning fog while his mind drifted to thoughts of Amira, his niece, and how he'd need to buy her new school shoes this week. Even after the chaos, duty still came first. He heard footsteps before he saw the rage. Vincent approached, his face hard, his suit disheveled. "Carter!" he barked. "I want you off my property now." James turned slowly, meeting his eyes without fear. "May I ask why, sir?" "You know why," Vincent snapped. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You took advantage of a situation and lured my wife into your room." James's brow furrowed slightly. "With respect, sir, your wife came of her own decision, and I offered her nothing but a safe place for the night." Vincent's voice rose. "Don't play innocent. I could have you arrested for this." A calm but firm voice interrupted from behind. Harlan Price, the guest from last night, stepping out of his car parked by the curb. "You'll do no such thing, Vincent." Vincent spun around. "You again?" "Yes," Harlan said coolly, pulling his phone from his pocket. "And before you make another foolish threat, remember, everything you said last night is recorded. The bet, the insult, the humiliation. If you call the police, I'll release it. To the press." The color drained from Vincent's face. His lips trembled as he took a step back. "You wouldn't—" "Oh, I would," Harlan said with a smirk. "You've been mocking men like James your entire life. But last night the world saw the truth. And I'm not about to let you rewrite it." For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. Even the guards nearby froze, unsure which side to stand on. Finally, James broke the silence. "Please," he said calmly, "there's no need for threats. I hold no grudge. I only did what any decent man should." His words, humble yet piercing, hung in the mist. Vincent looked at him, this man he had mocked, belittled and dismissed, and for the first time saw someone he couldn't command, not with money, not with power, not with fear. He clenched his fists, but his voice faltered. "Get back to your post," he muttered hoarsely. Then he turned and walked away, his steps slow, shoulders heavy. Harlan watched him go, then looked at James with quiet respect. "You handled that better than any man I know." James gave a small nod. Sometimes peace wins louder than pride, and as the mist lifted, the mansion stood still, a monument to wealth that had just been humbled by truth. That night, the mansion was eerily quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to move softly, as if afraid to disturb the stillness that had settled over the Morello estate. The servants spoke in whispers. Footsteps were gentle. Something sacred, or perhaps broken, lingered in the air. In his office, Vincent Morello sat in the dim light of his desk lamp. The clock ticked slowly, each sound echoing like judgment. His tie was loosened, his eyes hollow. On his desk lay the same phone that had once been his weapon, the symbol of control, of wealth, of power. Tonight it was just a mirror reflecting his failure. He stared at his own reflection in the glass surface and saw a man he barely recognized. The arrogance gone, the charm faded. For the first time, he didn't see the billionaire everyone admired. He saw the man everyone feared. And quietly pitied. "Why did I do that?" he whispered to himself. "What was I trying to prove?" He poured a glass of whiskey but didn't drink it. His thoughts drifted back to the laughter, the bet, Isabella's face when she walked away. He clenched his fists, regret twisting in his chest like a knife. "I was just joking," he muttered, but the words sounded pathetic, meaningless. Upstairs in the staff quarters, Isabella lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The small room was peaceful in a way the mansion had never been. She could hear faint music from a distant house and the chirping of night crickets. It was humble, yet it felt real, more alive than the golden cage she'd lived in for years. She thought about Vincent, the man she had fallen in love with years ago when he still laughed freely, before wealth hardened him. She missed that man, but she wasn't sure he still existed. Outside, James stood under the dim porch light, watching the moon slip behind clouds. His radio crackled softly on his belt, but the property was still. His mind wasn't. He thought about how words could wound deeper than fists, and how pride could destroy what love had built. From his post, he could see the faint glow of Isabella's window. He whispered quietly, "God, give her peace, and give him understanding." At that same moment, Vincent opened his drawer and pulled out an old photograph. Their wedding day, Isabella radiant and laughing in his arms. He remembered her promise. "As long as you respect me, I'll love you through anything." Tears blurred his vision. "I broke the only promise that mattered," he murmured. In the quiet of the night, he picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over her contact name. He wanted to text her, "I'm sorry," but his pride hesitated, whispering that it was too late. He set the phone down and buried his face in his hands. Hours passed before he finally looked up again, eyes red but determined. For the first time, he wasn't thinking like Vincent Morello, the billionaire. He was thinking like Vincent, the husband who had lost his way. He rose, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Tomorrow, I fix this. No matter what it costs me." Down by the gate, James exhaled slowly, feeling the shift in the air, a faint, fragile calm, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. And inside the staff quarters, Isabella finally drifted into sleep, unaware that her husband's heart had just begun its long journey toward humility. Dawn crept slowly over the horizon, painting the mansion in pale gold. The morning light usually filled the Morello estate with power and pride. Today, it only revealed silence. The servants moved quietly, their eyes downcast. The tension that had begun the night before still clung to every corner of the house like a ghost. Vincent Morello sat in the grand dining room, still in the same clothes he'd worn yesterday. The untouched breakfast before him had gone cold. He wasn't hungry. He was hollow. Every echo in that enormous hall reminded him of laughter that used to be his, the confident laughter of a man who thought himself untouchable. Now, he wasn't laughing. From the window, he could see the staff quarters in the distance. The curtains were still drawn. Somewhere beyond those walls was Isabella, his wife, his pride, his heartbreak. He could barely believe she'd chosen to sleep there. His friend and financial advisor, Darren Cole, entered quietly, holding a newspaper. "You've made headlines again," he said grimly, laying it on the table. Vincent looked down and felt his stomach twist. The headline read, "Billionaire's insult backfires. Wife leaves mansion after public bet." Underneath was a photo taken at the party, him standing arrogantly with a wine glass in hand. James in the background, Isabella looking away. The image spoke louder than any words could. Vincent gritted his teeth. "Who leaked this?" Darren shrugged. "It doesn't matter now. Everyone's talking about it. Investors are nervous. PR is burning the phones. You've got to do something fast." Vincent sank into his chair. "You think I don't know that?" He rubbed his temples. "I've built everything from the ground up, Darren. I made this name worth billions, and now I've ruined it with one sentence." Darren hesitated before saying softly, "You didn't just ruin your name, Vince. You ruined your home." Those words landed heavy. Vincent didn't respond. He simply stared at the empty space beside him, the chair Isabella used to sit in every morning, laughing softly as she sipped her coffee. That chair felt colder than the marble beneath his feet. Across the estate, James stood by his post watching as cars entered and left the gates. He could sense the unease that hung in the air. One of the junior guards whispered to him, "They say the boss is losing his mind over what happened." James sighed. "Sometimes you have to lose your mind to find your heart." Later that afternoon, as the rain clouds returned, Vincent wandered into the backyard garden, Isabella's favorite place. The flowers she'd planted bloomed brilliantly, untouched by the chaos inside the house. He knelt down beside her roses, his expensive trousers staining with mud. She loved these, he muttered to himself, said they reminded her of Madrid. He touched one of the petals gently, the softness breaking something deep within him. For the first time in years, Vincent cried, not out of anger, but remorse. The tears came hot and fast, washing away the last of his arrogance. Through the open kitchen window, the maids saw him kneeling in the rain, whispering apologies to no one and everyone. It was a sight no one had ever imagined. The billionaire who never bowed to anyone, now brought to his knees by his own pride. Inside the staff quarters, Isabella watched from her window. She saw the figure of her husband, drenched, trembling, humbled. Her heart clenched. She didn't feel triumph, only sadness. Because love, once wounded by disrespect, rarely healed without scars. That evening, when James returned from his patrol, Isabella spoke quietly. "He's breaking." James nodded. "Sometimes a man must break before he bends." And as thunder rumbled in the distance once more, Vincent remained in the garden, rain mixing with his tears. For the first time in his life, he didn't care about reputation, status, or pride. He just wanted his wife back, and the forgiveness that money could never buy. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the mansion washed clean but heavy with silence. A thin fog clung to the gardens where Vincent Morello had spent most of the night, sitting alone among Isabella's roses, soaked to the bone, the scent of wet earth replacing the usual perfume of wealth that defined his life. When he finally rose from the ground, his knees were stiff and his hands dirty. The billionaire who once measured life by gold and status now felt stripped of everything but truth. He walked back into the house slowly, each step echoing through the empty hallways that had once been full of guests and laughter. In the foyer, the staff froze when they saw him. His suit was rumpled, his hair damp, his eyes swollen and red. But he didn't shout. He didn't demand coffee or bark orders. He simply said, "Where is Mr. Carter?" "Outside, sir," one of the guards replied softly. "He's already at his post." Vincent nodded and made his way toward the gate. The early sun stretched across the wet driveway, painting everything in soft gold. James stood there as always, upright, calm, composed. His uniform was clean, his shoes polished, his posture dignified. When Vincent approached, James noticed something different, not in his clothes, but in his eyes. The arrogance was gone. What stood there instead was something rare from a man like Vincent: humility. "Morning, sir," James greeted quietly, his usual discipline intact. Vincent stopped in front of him, taking a slow breath. His voice came out low and rough. "James, I owe you an apology." James looked at him calmly, saying nothing. "I disrespected you," Vincent continued. "I disrespected my wife and myself." "You didn't deserve that. None of it." He paused, searching for words he wasn't used to saying. "I was a fool. I thought my money made me bigger than others. But last night I realized something. All that money doesn't make me a man. Respect does, and I've failed at that." James's expression softened, though he remained quiet for a moment before replying. "Sir, no one is beyond learning." "We all fall short sometimes. What matters is what we do after we realize it." Vincent nodded slowly, his voice trembling. "You're right. I've lived too long thinking pride was strength." He extended his hand, something he'd never done before with any of his employees. For a moment, James hesitated, then shook his hand firmly. That single handshake said more than 1,000 words could. It wasn't between boss and worker. It was between man and man. Just then, Isabella appeared in the distance, walking across the courtyard toward them. She wore a simple cream dress, her hair pulled back, her face calm but unreadable. Vincent turned at the sound of her footsteps. His heart pounded, shame and hope colliding inside him. "Isabella," he said quietly, "I've wronged you more than words can fix. I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." For a long moment, she said nothing. Her eyes searched his face, seeing the sincerity there, raw and unpolished. Finally, she nodded softly. Respect begins with humility, Vincent. Today, you took your first step. A small smile tugged at James's lips as he looked away, giving them privacy. Vincent turned to him once more. James, he said, clearing his throat, from today forward, you're not just security. You're head of security and translation liaison. You'll manage our international partners, with full authority and double your salary. The words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. The nearby guards exchanged stunned glances, but James only bowed his head. Thank you, sir. I'll do my best. Vincent smiled faintly. You already have. As Isabella walked beside her husband back toward the mansion, her arm lightly brushed his. The distance between them wasn't gone yet, but it had begun to close, not through wealth or grand gestures, but through repentance, and behind them, at the gate, James stood tall beneath the brightening sky, a living reminder that respect, once lost, can still be rebuilt when a man learns to speak the quiet language of humility. The next day dawned brighter than any in recent memory. The rain had washed away not only the dust from the gardens, but something heavier, the tension that had lingered between pride and pain. The morning breeze moved through the trees with a kind of gentleness, as if the world itself sensed that something was finally changing inside the Morello mansion. For the first time in years, Vincent Morello didn't rush out for meetings or calls. He didn't bark orders or check his stock portfolio. Instead, he stood before a mirror, buttoning a plain gray shirt, a sharp contrast to the silk suits he once wore. His reflection looked older but more human. He walked slowly into the dining room, where Isabella sat quietly at the table sipping her coffee. She looked up as he entered, her eyes cautious but calm. "Good morning," he said softly. She nodded. "Good morning, Vincent." For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Then, Vincent took a deep breath and pulled out a chair across from her. "I've said many words in my life," he began quietly, "but there's one I've never truly meant until now." Isabella looked at him, waiting. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Not for last night alone, but for every time I made you feel small. For treating people like decorations in my world. For confusing pride with strength." His voice broke slightly. "When you walked away, I realized I didn't just lose your respect, I lost my own. And it terrified me." Isabella's eyes softened, but she stayed silent. He went on. "I can't erase what I said. But I can change what kind of man says it again." The sincerity in his tone made her chest tighten. She had seen Vincent apologize before, to investors, to journalists, to friends when business demanded it, but never like this. This was not the language of ego. It was the voice of a man stripped down to truth. Slowly, she set her cup down. "Do you know what hurt most, Vincent?" she said softly. It wasn't the joke. "It was that you meant it enough to say it in front of everyone. You didn't see me as your partner in that moment. You saw me as your possession." He lowered his eyes. "I know," he whispered, "and it shames me." She looked at him for a long time, then nodded slightly. "Then let that shame teach you. Don't bury it with wealth or pride. Let it change you." Vincent exhaled deeply, as if releasing years of arrogance from his chest. "That's all I want now," he said. A knock at the door interrupted them. James stood there holding a folder. He looked composed, as always. "Excuse me, sir. The new security reports are ready." Vincent smiled faintly. "Thank you, James. Come in." Isabella turned to James with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." "Good morning, ma'am," he replied respectfully. Vincent looked at the two of them, then gestured toward a seat. "Sit down, James." James hesitated. "Sir?" "Yes," Vincent said firmly but kindly. "Sit. You're not just staff, you're part of this house now." James slowly sat, feeling the weight of a moment he hadn't expected. Vincent extended his hand once more. "I meant what I said yesterday. Thank you for reminding me what respect looks like, and for not becoming bitter when I deserved your anger." James nodded, his expression steady but touched. "We all learn, sir. Life is a better teacher than pride." Isabella smiled gently. "That's true." For a brief moment, The three of them sat together in peace, the billionaire, his wife, and the humble man who had taught them both a priceless lesson. Outside, sunlight poured through the wide windows, washing the room in gold. And for the first time in a long time, laughter, soft, genuine laughter, returned to the Morello home. It wasn't the sound of victory. It was the sound of healing. Weeks passed, and the mansion that once echoed with arrogance slowly began to breathe with peace. The servants smiled again. The halls felt lighter. The same golden gates that had opened each morning for Vincent's pride now opened for his humility. Vincent Morello had changed, not through wealth or power, but through reflection. He no longer saw the people around him as mere workers. He saw them as human beings, each with stories, families, and dreams just like his own. Every morning, he made it a point to greet the staff by name. When the gardeners worked in the sun, he offered them cold water. When the maids passed, he thanked them personally. It was strange at first, almost uncomfortable, but soon it became real, genuine. And Isabella watched all this quietly. She had forgiven him, not because he begged, but because he learned. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about transformation. One afternoon, Vincent called a meeting in the main hall. All employees gathered, whispering nervously. James stood among them, his calm presence unchanged. When Vincent entered, he wasn't wearing his usual suit. He wore a simple white shirt and spoke with a voice that carried warmth, not authority. "I've spent years thinking respect came with status," Vincent began. "But now I know. It comes from how you treat those who can't give you anything in return. I once mocked the very people who kept this house standing. And one man, through his silence, showed me what real dignity looks like." He turned toward James. "Mr. Carter, please come forward." James stepped up, composed yet humble. Vincent continued, "From today, you are officially head of security and translation liaison for all our international partnerships. You'll oversee communication and protocol for the entire Morello group." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Vincent smiled faintly. "You've taught me more about leadership than any executive ever has. You reminded me that strength doesn't shout. It stands tall and speaks only when needed." James bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, sir. But I only did what was right," Vincent nodded. "And that, James, is exactly why you deserve this." As the staff applauded, Isabella's eyes shimmered with quiet pride. She stepped beside her husband and whispered, "Now you speak the only language that truly matters." Vincent smiled softly. "Respect," he said. "The one word I never learned until I lost everything that mattered." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Vincent and Isabella walked through the garden hand in hand. The roses she had planted glowed red under the fading light. "Do you think we'll be all right?" she asked softly. He looked at her with a gentleness she hadn't seen in years. "If I keep remembering that love and respect share the same root," he said, "then yes, we will." Across the lawn, James stood by the gate, his silhouette framed by the last gold rays of sunset. The breeze carried his quiet voice as he radioed to his team, maintaining his post as always. Yet this time, the gates he guarded no longer symbolized division. They stood for change. As he watched Vincent and Isabella walking side by side, he smiled to himself. "Never underestimate quiet people," he murmured. "They carry the kind of power that changes hearts." And from that day forward, the Morello mansion became known not for its riches, but for its redemption. The billionaire who once mocked humility had finally learned its greatest truth. Respect is the true language of greatness.